Yeah, video response to a zombie picture show video. Yeah, he's basically insane and way off the subject. But I'll just respond to a couple of things. Okay, so his facts that he keeps throwing at me as if they're somehow relevant, which they aren't, because they're not anything I'm contesting or asserting. But anyway, he keeps talking about how small the number of people is who commit suicide, and he keeps doing it by comparing the number of suicides per year to the total population on Earth, instead of comparing the number of people who commit suicide to the total deaths per year. And that's the number difference. That's the only relevant number, right? And even if you're going to make that comparison to figure out the significance of suicide as an ending to a life, rationally you should say, well, obviously kids don't have the choice to commit suicide, and they usually die by accident or some other condition. So, let's take child deaths out of the equation, and let's take accidental deaths out of the equation, and see how many people choose suicide versus natural death. And that would be a more relevant number. But regardless, it just doesn't matter to me. The point of my argument is, and the part that he face-palmed, was the metaphor from the movie, just the idea that there is always a number, okay, where, and again, I've made this point in videos, that the argument is really about your standards and where your standard of acceptable is. So if I was to say, let's just thought experiment, simple one, you have Disney World, and let's say Disney World kills a certain number of kids per year, okay? How high would that number have to get before you would close Disney World? Sort of a simple question, but it's really hard to answer. I've sort of also metaphored how many people would have to be killed in World War III for you to say, yeah, the human race is pretty much failed. I get it now. So what kind of number do we have to come up with? And it seems obvious that this guy's number is really high. Okay, his tolerance for forcing people essentially to die miserably or suffer diseases he has a high tolerance for it. It's okay with him because he thinks he's doing something good enough to justify it. And that's the other part of my argument, is what is the good reason? I mean, I'm basically contending without good reason you have no right. Okay, that rights are a construct of reason. You have to have a reason to do something to have a right to do something when it implicates somebody besides yourself. I mean, it's that kind of a simple argument. To trespass, you have to have a reason. And I'm still asking the question, what's the good reason to impose any harm on anything? And I don't hear any good reason besides I want to. And that's not really a reason. It's not a good enough reason. It's not a rational reason. Rationally articulated or anything. So anyway, so that's the number dispute. The major statistical number dispute is just that you have to compare suicide deaths to total deaths per year, not the number of people alive. It just doesn't make any sense to compare. Obviously all people live to be an average of whatever the international average is, whatever, 60 something, right, at least. So there's no point in comparing any disease to the total number of people in the world, because your risk is yearly and it's accumulative over your lifetime, and that's what's relevant. And the fact that you didn't die of suicide this year doesn't mean you're not going to die of suicide next year. Anyway, so yeah, the subject of the video, so let's get back to the original subject, which was the drunk driving metaphor. So it's just one of the metaphors used to describe procreation. And the real point of the metaphor is to reveal risk ignorance. Okay, and it's not even so much risk ignorance, it's risk ignorance. It's this ability for people to say, I just don't care, which this guy sort of advocates. Don't be emotional. that somehow people aren't supposed to be, even if they're aware of a risk, they're somehow not supposed to consider the risk. And the whole point is that's what most procreators are doing, is they're practicing risk ignorance, much like a drunk driver who knows in his head he's not really competent, knows he's putting people at risk, and he just doesn't care. And that's what most procreators are doing. They're participating in activity without any reasonable appreciation for the heightened risk. They're jeopardizing something too. They're ignoring the risk and only concentrating on what they hope will be the outcome. And that's ignorant and irresponsible behavior, in my opinion. Alright, yeah, so I think I got to that one. Alright, so just on the subject of this emotionalism argument, which is sort of a bogus argument. Emotionalism as an appeal is wrong if you're using a prejudice. So if you're going based on cuteness or whiteness or some other prejudiced or bigoted emotional response, okay, that would be considered cheating the argument. Alright, to, like, say, even when I do use children, like, you know, you do, like, okay, here's the Disney World example, and you use children. How many children have to die? Part of that's legitimate because it's a theme park for kids, but part of it's illegitimate in the sense that somehow we are more sympathetic to the destruction of a child's life than the destruction of an adult's life. But again, part of that is legitimate because in actuality I think we do value those things differently. We sort of say it's, you know, it's worse, you know, the more potential that's thrown away. And I guess worse in a sense too, where if you, at least you have a chance to realize a fullness to your life, an actualization of your life. So you reach some level of maturity, you have sex, and you have these other things, then at least you had a life. It was maybe not a complete life, but it was more complete. And so if it ends, it's not as big a tragedy than if you're invested in 13 years of it and it's denied, you're denied the actualization of much of the desire that's probably been built up in you. So yeah, the dying a virgin sucks. We could almost just say it that simply. Yeah. Anyway, it sucks more than just dying not a virgin. It seems just rational to say, yeah, if you're going to die, it's better to get laid first. That would be my logic anyway. Alright, so let's see if there's anything else I have to deal with. So I'm just saying emotionalism is a function. You can't sit there and say you can void yourself of emotionalism because there's subjects that are just instantaneously and fundamentally emotional. You can't, there's no way to change that. I mean, I could describe some torture circumstance and there's no way you can't have an emotional reaction just because you will imagine yourself in such a circumstance and you will emotionally react to how horrible that would be. And so it's just stupid to say you can separate yourself entirely from emotion. But the point is to separate yourself from some sort of bigotry like nepotism, some irrational emotionalism. Not rash. There's a difference between rational emotionalism, stuff where you imagine being in the circumstance and you say, ooh, I would hate that. That's rational emotionalism. And irrational emotionalism, which is my kids are better than their kids, and my country's better than their country, and my race is better than their race. That kind of irrational crap. So it should be a distinction made. Anyway. Alright, so then he spent a bunch of time arguing about birth control, like that was the subject, and wasn't any subject of mine. He even claimed I claimed that the rhythm method worked, and I said exactly the opposite in the video. I said the reason why the rhythm method is not very good is because sperm can live a long time. I said those exact words, so obviously I wasn't advocating for the rhythm method. You certainly can use a lot of natural methods to detect when a woman's produced an egg, and then you can just figure out how long it's going to take the egg to get through the tube, and then, you know, once the egg pops out of the tube, you're safe, generally speaking. So, you know, you can definitely figure out when you're at higher risk. So that's the method I've practiced in my existence, is just to have some knowledge of the woman's cycle and realize there's times where you're at a higher risk of pregnancy and times when you're at a lower risk of pregnancy. So you can, at high risk moments, you can use extra birth control, like double up, spermicide and condom, or sponge and condom, or whatever. Or you can pull out, or, you know, it just depends on how paranoid you are. And there's low risk times where, yeah, maybe spermicide's enough and condom breaks, well, it's bad, but it's not the end of the world, because it's not the high risk point in the cycle. So, I mean, that knowledge is helpful. And I'm just saying, he's saying that this birth control thing doesn't work, and I'm arguing quite obviously it does work. I mean, most people, when they really want to stop having kids, they stop having kids. So obviously birth control is pretty reliable when people are motivated. And that would be my argument, that it's really about motivation. And he was still using in this stupid video this argument that somehow there's 41% of pregnancies are accidents, and it's just not appropriate to call a mistimed pregnancy an accident. Obviously the people aren't aggressively attempting to prevent pregnancy. So you're not having an accident when you're not practicing safety methods against accidents. You know, so it's just stupid to say that's an accident, in my opinion. It's stupid to put that in the same category as birth control failure. When you're not using birth control, you can't really call it birth control failure. So anyway, I mean, really. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So I don't want to get into I mean, it's not my agenda to get into. I mean, it probably would be good for someone to make videos about different birth control. I mean, you know, like I said, double upping on methods, and you know, you can use the pill different ways to also make it safer in certain periods of the cycle. I mean, there's lots of tricks you can play to have pretty safe periods of sexual activity, and then have periods where, you know, let's just lay off for a week, and you know, that kind of shit. So yeah, but I'm not going to make those videos. So anyway, yeah, I got other things to do. And I'm also not an expert, but, you know, I've successfully avoided pregnancy, so I've obviously know how to do it to some extent. I mean, it's not, you know, I haven't proven it through enough permutations, I guess, to say I'm qualified as a professional. But yeah, I just got the job done. Didn't fail. Yeah, so I have 100% reliability. Yeah, no failures. Anyway, but enough. So really, the subject is really the important thing is this idea of how many people do you make victim to have what you want. So how many kids do you sacrifice to Disneyland? Right now we're sacrificing kids to Pee-wee football, right? I mean, every year a certain number of kids are killed and paralyzed and catastrophically injured for the sake of the great football game. And what number? How high does that number of casualties have to get? How many kids have to be ruined for you to say it's too many? Let's quit doing that. And so that's really what the argument's about, is that obviously I have a high standard of risk aversion, and most of you people arguing on either side have a very low standard of risk aversion, and you don't mind creating some victims. You don't mind looking over the battlefield and seeing the carnage, because you think you're doing something that's worth the carnage. And I'm claiming I don't see any evidence of what you're doing that's worth it. you haven't explained what you're doing that's so much better than what the non-existent Martians are doing. And until you do that, until you show me how you're so much better than the non-existent Martians, the would-be Martians, if the Martians existed, how you're better than they are. Yeah, and how you would be more missable than they are. Why would you be more missable than the non-existent Martians? Why? Rationally, unemotionally. Explain that one. So anyway, so again, I think no right without reason. It's a good bumper sticker kind of phrase. Yeah, no right without reason. So what's the reason? What's the justification? And how many victims are you allowed to make to have your Christmas presents? How much blood is permissible on the wrapping paper? Yeah. Okay, enough of the video. Thank you very much and such.